All right, everybody, let's get started. My name is John Seidel. I'm the director of the South Weehawken Southeast Asia Center here at the LSE. And on behalf of the center, I'd like to welcome you all to today's seminar, which is also online. So it's also a webinar. And we'll be talking about platformization, citizenship, and statecraft in Vietnam, a three-body problem, with our guest speaker, Professor Marie-Gilbert Flutre, in from Paris for this occasion to talk about her research. Before we get started and before I introduce her properly, a few bits of housekeeping. First of all, it is an online talk as well as in person, and it is being recorded, so mind your manners, behave yourselves accordingly. You'll be recorded for posterity. Anyone who's attending on Zoom, you will have an opportunity after the talk to post your questions to the speaker. Please do so using the Q&A function, and we'll put an example of how to do that up on the Q&A function. Please include your name, your affiliation, your location, and obviously your question. If you want to tweet about this event or otherwise flag us on social media, please do so, care of LSE SCAC. I should also mention some future events hosted by the center. Next week, we have a talk by Martin Slama, an anthropologist coming in from Vienna, who will be talking about the notion of exemplary centers, a very established notion in the study of Southeast Asia, as he applies it to contemporary Indonesia. And the following week, we have no less than 3 talks, one by Meredith Weiss on the Tuesday evening, one by Pavan Mano on Wednesday at noon in this slot, and then one on the Thursday evening by Dan Slater. The first 2 events are focused on issues of sort of queer studies, of scapegoating, of LGBTQ people in Malaysia. Pavan Mano doing a book launch about his book about nationalism and sexuality in Singapore. And then Dan Slater talking about what dynasties, cartels, and the like as blocks to democratization across Southeast Asia. So meanwhile, here we are today, and we are lucky to have with us Professor Marie-Gilbert Flutre, who's a professor of geography at the Université de Paris, Panthéon-Sorbonne in Paris. She is the author of a number of books in French, Les Envers de la Métropolisation, Les Ruelles de Ho Chi Minh Ville, Vietnam, published by CNRS in 2019, co-edited Asian Alleyways and Urban Vernacular in Times of Globalization, published by Amsterdam University Press in 2020, and most recently a co-edited volume, City Makers and the Politics of Urban Diversity Governance, Comparative Approaches from Europe and Asia, published by Springer in 2025, and that's open access, so you can grab it without paying a cent or a euro. I should mention more broadly that, as some of the titles of her work suggests, she's a very prominent urban geographer of Southeast Asia who's noted for her studies of the back streets and alleyways of cities like Ho Chi Minh City and the sort of back neighborhoods and public spaces of cities. Her book has beautiful photographs and maps that add to the pleasures of this kind of research. But she's recently been moving from these back alleyways to the digital superhighways and looking at the kinds of issues that she'll be discussing today on platformization, citizenship, and statecraft in Vietnam. So please join me in welcoming her properly.
Good morning, everyone. It's really my great pleasure to be with you today. So first, I would like to warmly thank John and Petra and everyone at the LSE THEAC for allowing me to share my work. And I hope to engage with stimulating conversation with scholars on Southeast Asia and East Asia. So first, let me briefly introduce myself to explain where I speak from and how I came to study platformization in the Vietnamese context. As John said, I began my research on Vietnamese city roughly 15 years ago by exploring the everyday public spaces, particularly the streets and alleyways, which were very central to my PhD research and my subsequent postdoc at the Asia Research Institute in Singapore. This research led to this 2-book publication. In this initial research, I focused on urban dwellers' daily practices, emphasizing their ability to navigate and to produce the city in the sense of unreal favor. despite the authoritarian political regime of Vietnam. But I clearly remember the year 2015 being a pivotal year. From one fieldwork session to another, the Seom, the traditional motorbike drivers who used to occupy every crossroad and sidewalk in Ho Chi Minh City, waiting for potential clients, had suddenly almost disappeared. Meanwhile, streets and sidewalks were filled with motorbike taxi drivers wearing highly recognizable green jackets with a Grab logo on it. Platformization of urban services had just struck in Vietnam, just as this is the case in most major cities around the world. Platform work in public space has thus imposed itself on me, particularly because Vietnamese citizens are now widely equipped with smartphones, if not two at the same time, which they keep at hand at all times. For instance, they use a national messaging app, Zalo, to rent the space in front of their houses to informal street vendors, just to quote one example. So following these very first observations, and after completing a long-term research on urban rhythm in Vietnamese streets with the CNET program, the Southeast Asia Neighborhood Networks, I conducted a very first series of interviews with Grab drivers. It was in 1918, and I wanted to understand their personal trajectories and their perception of the job in relation to the public space they occupied and worked in. This occurred just before COVID struck, leading to the closing of national borders in Vietnam. Therefore, I had no choice but to pursue this research online for a few years via the exploration of Facebook pages and forums until I could return to Ho Chi Minh City in 2022 to conduct a more intensive fieldwork session with a wonderful team of master's degree students from the Vietnamese Studies Department at the University Paris-Cité, where I was an associate professor at that time. So my presentation today will try to retrace this long-term research project I conducted in Ho Chi Minh City over the past 6 years. And I chose to open up this presentation with these two pictures. The first one being quite striking for everyone familiar with the Vietnamese political context. With its authoritarian single-party regime and strict state control of all forms of organization and public expression, demonstration in public space is almost impossible in Vietnam. But this picture, published in the press, was taken in December 2020 in Ho Chi Minh City, when hundreds of Grab ride-hailing app drivers went on strikes to protest against the unilateral increase of the app percentage in the ride remuneration in response to the rise of governmental taxes. This scene thus raises questions. Never before have precarious workers, because of course Grab drivers are precarious, never they have been able to form collectives and to agitate openly in public spaces for their rights. How was this picture even possible? The story behind this picture is of course multi-layered, but one thing is clear. The platformization of the economy shacked up the political game in Vietnam. And this last point stands at the core of my presentation today. Then, after destabilizing years following the arrival of the platform, the second picture here advertised the launch of a newly centralized governmental hub to, I quote here, and translate, replace every administrative paper document. This shows how the perception of platformization has deeply evolved in 5 years in Vietnam, from a crisis to be managed to a new set of governing tools. The exponential growth of digital platform-mediated service in cities has become a new central attribute of the planetary urban condition, and Asian cities stand at the forefront of these new urban practices. Roger and Moores underline, I quote, a new co-generative dynamics of platform and cities. In the meantime, digitalization of urban governance has also become a global trend that Orit Alpern and Robert Mitchell call the smartness mandate. But my point today is to reintroduce situatedness of digital pathways in various national contexts into the conversation, starting by remembering that platforms remain context-dependent social infrastructures and not only global objects. More specifically, I want to unpack the digitalization of urban practices and of urban governance in and from authoritarian political contexts in a worlding-provincializing perspectives. This worlding-provincializing perspective calls for closer engagement with how global trends translate in context-specific ways and offer disruptive potential. In particular, it challenged dominant discourses surrounding the digitalization of urban governance, especially under democratic regimes, mostly usually in the global north. Furthermore, most research addressing platformization of urban services tend to revolve around the precarization of digital workers, when research on digital governance in authoritarian regime tends to focus narrowly on surveillance tools used to digitally control populations. Of course, this trend exists, they're reality. But beyond these limited perspectives, I want to focus on how authoritarian regimes learn from and adapt to the digitalization of society, which often initially emerge from the private sector. In this way, I try to turn the perspective upside down. I love doing upside down things. It's the title of my PhD book, The Envers dans la Métropolisation, to demonstrate how examining digital pathways allow us to uncover the pragmatic mechanism of authoritarianism and its mode of negotiation. So my research questions are the double. First, how does platformization challenge the citizenship practices and citizen collective engagement, particularly when it comes to platform workers? And also, how does platformization challenge Vietnamese statecraft? What does the authoritarian state learn from it since the arrival of these platforms? By grounding my research in Vietnam, I try to anchor the understanding of the paradoxical effects of platformization on urban governance in empirical material collected in a less iconic urban context. Vietnam is particularly notable for different things. First, it's still a global South country with, for instance, a very distinctive high rate of informal employment in cities. Annette Kim estimates, for instance, that over 30% of Ho Chi Minh City dwellers still depend informally on public spaces for the economic activities and subsistence. Second, like China, Vietnam has a post-socialist trajectory characterized by a single-party state still ruling the country in an authoritarian manner. It is one of the last communist states in the world, associated with what I call a negotiated authoritarianism. This expression highlights the flexibility, co-optation, and capacity of the Vietnamese state to incrementally integrate different elements of tension that could undermine state stability. So by this expression, I argue that the Vietnamese state addresses disruptions with plural and pragmatic responses, challenging the view of a developmental state with a very clear agenda. 10 years after the article I published with Juliette Segar on this notion of negotiated authoritarianism, the sudden emergence of digital foreign platforms as new urban players present a valuable opportunity to assess the evolution of such a negotiated authoritarianism in the digital age. Third, Vietnam is also known for being a rapidly digitalizing East Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries. The penetration rates of smartphones now cover over 93% of the adult population, which is one of the highest rates in Southeast Asia. To illustrate this last point, this table just shows that between 2012 and 2020, the smartphone penetration rate in Vietnam increased from 16% to 93%, which is massive, huge, and very fast. So I developed my argument by investigating the reorganization of the informal motorbike taxi sector in Vietnam, following the stunning arrival of the Singaporean Grab app in the local market in 2014. Grab, for everyone, I mean, everyone is familiar with Southeast Asia, so you all know Grabs, and you probably have the app on your phone, but it became the dominant, if not monopolistic, ride-hailing company in the country. It even pushed Uber out of the region in 2018, and very recently, the Indonesian platform Gojek also left Vietnam. So it's kind of a monopolistic, platform. Urban mobility was in fact merely a market entry point for Grab to conquer now more lucrative markets, as it pretended to have become today the everyday everything app. In my research, I conceive platforms as an infrastructural power that contributes to the restructuring of governance practices in Vietnam. And I explore in particular how platformization challenges the performative practices of citizenship, of informal workers in particular, and statecraft in Vietnam today. And I posit that platform economy has generated what I call a three-body problem in Vietnamese urban power relationships. I borrow this expression from physics and classical mechanics, where the three-body problems refer to the problem of tech. Don't worry, I'm not going to do a huge, detour by classical mechanics, but just, I think the analogy is interesting. So it refers in physics in the problem of taking the initial positions and velocities of three-point masses and solving for their subsequent motion according to Newton's laws of motion and gravitation. So with a two-body problem, you can, expect and calculate the movement of the masses. But for three-body problem and more, no general closed form solution exists. And the resulting system is chaotic. So by entering the game, international private apps disrupted the historical bilateral relationship between the Vietnamese state and its informal small entrepreneurs. As a result, my hypothesis is that now a three-body problem generates unforeseen interstices of political negotiations between three sets of actors instead of two. So namely the Vietnamese state, the private platform, Grab, and small urban entrepreneurs working for the platform. To conduct this research, I performed a four-pronged ethnographic approach, encompassing first a digital ethnography of several Facebook pages of various Grab drivers since 2018, which offered now a longitudinal span of around 7 years and allowed me to analyze major changes in the sophistication of the Grab app and its algorithm. That's one of the technical problems of working on platformization, is that the rules and the algorithm, it's changing like almost every week or every month. It helps as well to see how the drivers have evolving strategy to adapt as well in terms of individual and collective responses. Then I conducted with a team of students 55 in-depth interviews of motor taxi Grab drivers from different social profiles in Ho Chi Minh City. And we participate in observation of Grab drivers community through the year 2022. We were invited to several, social events, thanks to good relationship we built with one of the drivers. And more interestingly as well, I conducted interviews with state representatives, especially the one responsible for public transportation as the same year in Ho Chi Minh City. Of course, one thing is missing here. We never get granted to meet someone officially from the platform, from Grab, even Grab Vietnam. Or, yeah, that's something I'm still trying, but it's getting complicated. So to present my results, I will rely on a summary narrative analysis to craft stories of the evolving relationships between Grab, the workers, and the Vietnamese state, selectively contextualizing significant moments and events in the negotiation process between them in a three-body problem framework. So my argument unfolds in three acts. First, the arrival of the Grab platform in the urban landscape and the invention of technological drivers as a new shared condition, quite different from stay-home drivers, the former informal taxi drivers. Second moment is a crisis moment where there have been this demonstration I showed on the first slide around labor remuneration and taxation. And then today we are at a moment, we are in the reinvention of platformization as a governmental fix by the government. So let's first focus on the initial years of Grab arrival in Vietnam. Grab entered the Vietnamese market in November 2014. And at that time, no legal framework existed to regulate and tax platforms' work. As a result, as it's often the case all over the world, Grab benefited from an initial legal vacuum. Like its famous historical counterpart, Uber, Grab drivers are regarded as partners, tak in Vietnamese, rather than formal employees. So they have to pay for their own motorbikes, for their vests, for everything, for the gas. If they have an accident, they have to cover for their health, etc. Moreover, Grab is not classified as a transport company, and it's not taxed as one. It's not a taxi company. It's just, a platform that allows to put in touch clients and a service. Soon, Grab became highly popular among the Vietnamese urban population. Of course, Ho Chi Minh City is a city where less than 5% of daily travel relies on public transport. So the arrival of the platform represented a welcome alternative for people. This was especially true as Grab adapted to the national market by offering motor taxi services, and they offer tuk-tuk in Cambodia or Thailand and other national specificity transport in every country. And they allows cash payment, additionally to digital payments. Uber in Vietnam only allows for digital payments. So that was clearly a kind of a problem in the first place. And rather than being seen merely as another manifestation of informal labor, this new taxi service was quickly envisioned by the Vietnamese state as a formalization of small entrepreneurship, brought about by the entry of a private international company into the governmental game. Grab embodies the success story of digital modernization and carries the image of urban modernity, both in the eyes of the clients. Most clients of the Grab driver would never go with a stay-home driver, invoking security or trust, but they would use Grab drivers, even for motorbike taxi, because you can rate and everything. And for the state itself, it embodies technological revolution in Vietnam. So in response to this enforcing arrival, the Vietnamese state reacted as it always does when facing new phenomena. It established an ad hoc juridical pilot project to casually and temporarily legalize the activities of the platform for 2 years. A choice that interestingly differs from the Thai government, which attempted to ban digital foreign platforms from its markets. However, this new player soon faced opposition from traditional taxi drivers, notably the Southern company, Vinasun Taxi, which sued Grab for unfair competition regarding its taxation system. Interestingly, the first trial held in 2018 at the Ho Chi Minh City provincial level condemned Grab, acknowledging it should be recognized as a transport company. But the most intriguing development occurred less than a year later, when the high-level people procuracy in Hanoi overturned the first judgment, which was confirmed by the Court of Appeal. This was presumably because the Vietnamese state benefits directly from the company capacity to address two major national issues: inadequate public transport in cities and informal, hence untaxed, labor. This episode shows that how the Vietnamese state, often portrayed as highly centralized, was initially put into contradiction when facing the arrival of Grab. It illustrates as well the trial and error process of the Vietnamese state in addressing new issues. This is not specific to the adaptation to digitalization, but rather a recurring feature historically used, is illustrating once again the idea of negotiated authoritarianism. It was the same in the 1990s with pilot project for urbanization, for instance. In the aftermath of the positive judgment regarding the development of Grab in the country, the platform management fully engaged with national legislation, as demonstrated by the National Resolution of 2020, establishing an unprecedented legal framework and pilot public policies to address the challenge that continue to hinder the development of the digital economy in Vietnam. This was actually soon followed by another resolution that outlines the direction to be taken to, I quote, promote the development of e-commerce, digital economy, new business models based on information technology and digitalization. And Vietnam has now symbolically declared the 10th of October as the National Day of Digital Transition. This first act demonstrates a wait-and-see approach to addressing unforeseen disruptions, such as the unexpected arrival of platforms like Grab. The implementation of an ad hoc legal pilot project for ride-hailing platforms, followed by more sustainable resolutions, exemplifies of a governance arrangement designed to manage sudden changes and prevent an open crisis that could jeopardize state stability. It's what I call learning like an authoritarian state, using, of course, Scott's title. In the meantime, Grab drivers began to build unprecedented and unforeseen political subjectivities through the app, something the informal Xe-om driver have never been able to achieve. First, Grab drivers in Vietnam developed a strong sense of belonging to the same community, fostering group awareness through their unique socializing methods. They utilize public spaces to meet each other daily, such as sidewalks and coffee shops during their waiting time. Of course, the job of being a Grab driver is mostly waiting for clients. And although the obligation to wear the Grab uniform is viewed by the company as a means of promotion, it also serves as a way for drivers to recognize one another, facilitating meetings and exchanges among them. Moreover, wearing the jacket emblazoned with the Grab logo gives them a sense of modernity. And it's not even uncommon to see Xe-om drivers, so totally informal drivers, wearing this vest, even though they are not working for the app. The app prevents driver above 55 years old to connect. But some older drivers just wear the vest to be like more technological, as I said. So the work being delivered by the platform itself paradoxically alleviates the feeling of competition with one another, in contrast to former Xe-om drivers who had to secure their own sidewalk corner to build customer loyalty. Here, the business model is completely different. You don't have to secure the same sidewalk every day. You just wait for the platform to give you some work. Apart from casual meetings in the streets, drivers exchange a lot of advice on social media, such as Facebook and Zalo group. According to our interviews, most of the drivers use this media to get information, even though a lot of them never post anything. And there are actually a lot of debates and controversies on Facebook forums. Research on platform workers in the global north underlines the role of external actors, such as NGOs, lawyers, trade union leaders, in the socio-political struggles of ride-hailing platform workers. In Vietnam, this process is non-existent. Instead, it is Grab drivers themselves who have initiated ways to make themselves heard. And the most compelling elements of our fieldwork on the driver collective strategy to circumvent the disciplinary control of the platform labor's arrangement are the self-help groups called Grab teams that emerge spontaneously both in public spaces and online. This group of hundreds of drivers sprang up informally around self-identified leaders, chosen through opaque processes, I must say, relying on charisma, insider knowledge, availability, and the efficiency of their collective engagement. Our interview reveals that in Ho Chi Minh City, leaders often have close ties to the underground world. As such, they are respected by other drivers who refers to them as big brothers, Daika. These leaders collect and harness the everyday grievance of their fellow Grab drivers. But their role goes beyond merely dealing with practical needs and liaising with the everyday relationship between drivers and the platforms. We repeatedly met with Pham Mason, who is the team of the head of the United Teams, or Biker United. You see the logo here. And he showed us actually that he designed his own logo for the drivers of his team to put on their clothes or on a motorbike. And surprisingly, Grab acknowledged and formalized the existence of these spontaneously selected leaders by officially endorsing several Grab teams in the city in 2016. This actually came at a time where Grab was facing fierce competition from other apps to retain its drivers. Because of course, to be a competitive platform, you need to have a lot of drivers working for you, so the clients doesn't have to wait a long time. So they wanted to keep their drivers working for them. And Grab indeed has to constantly refine and adapt its business model to ensure its own development. So the platform actually negotiates constantly, both with the state, of course, to consolidate its institutional support, and with drivers to secure a larger supply of loyal drivers. So the platform doesn't like to have drivers who only connect for a few hours. They want to secure drivers that are committed to the platform all day long. This unprecedented endorsement of Grab team shows how Grab drivers, bolstered by the newly acquired status of technological drivers, as they call themselves, have been able to assert their right on specific labor issues and more broadly, their place in the urban economy and society. Grab teams even have been granted the privilege to meet directly with the head of the platform administration in Ho Chi Minh City, as shown on this picture. And after attending several meetings of the Biker United Grab team, I came to the conclusion that these teams function as informal but relatively efficient de facto union in a country where unionizing is fully controlled by the state and remains non-existent in the service sector. By organizing regular joint initiatives, the Grab teams also contributes to the driver emergent capacity to organize outside the scope of the app controls. And in June 2022, my research team was privy to a revealing team event, a festive picnic organized by the drivers themselves for their families. One participant explained to us what it meant to him to bring his wife along on such a recreational outing when he was privately rather ashamed to be a stay-home driver. The team leader stressed that the event was supported exclusively by donation from the drivers who did not wish to rely on any sponsors. The picnic brought together almost 100 participants and was carefully organized, with great care put into the staging and subsequent recording, disseminating via social media of the driver arrival at the picnic place. They were all wearing their Grab shirts, which is officially forbidden when off duty. And they gathered at different meeting points in the city and then traveled together for the final section on the road. A collective performance that reflected their pride in forming a recognizable team. The day then involved a mixture of entertaining activities and political speeches. Then Act 2, around year 2020. It's a critical moment around fiscal renegotiation, which stand at the heart of negotiation between the three body problem actors in the system of taxation. In late 2020, a unilateral increase of the app commission per ride, currently is 27% that the platform collect from each ride, was justified by the platform by increasing government taxes because of a new mode of calculation of the VAT, more precisely. And it led to unprecedented strikes and street demonstration by Grab drivers. Public protests are generally forbidden in Vietnam, but were tolerated in this case as it targeted a private foreign company and not the state itself. The online discussions surrounding these strikes show how Grab drivers address political issues by targeting the company itself. Striking does not, of course, require unanimity among drivers, and indeed the strikes provoke tension between drivers who participated and those who did not, while also triggering broader, impassioned debates about the place assigned to platform workers in the country and different approaches to fight for a decent way of life and working conditions. Some Grab actually prefers to confront the state directly about their working condition rather than the platform. As a Grab team leader, Pham Misson, one of our interviewees, said he was wary of criticizing the company and always strategically balanced his criticism between Grab and the state. So he declined to join the 2020 strike and tellingly compared his struggle to the historical Three Kingdom War, a contemporary battle involving Grab, the state, and the drivers. First, in late 2019, he traveled directly to Hanoi to personally deliver a petition to the Ministry of Finance, an act he repeated in late 2022 after COVID-19 prevented the ministry from responding. Despite his lack of success, the mere act of submitting such a petition, and he takes some picture, it's very well organized on some picture, he puts the date and everything. This comes from his personal collection, so he adds some legend on it. So it's really like a storytelling by the drivers themselves. So despite the lack of success, the act of submitting a petition illustrates in a way the formalized and legitimate image of Grab drivers. Certainly, again, in contrast with, say, informal driver before, who could never think of going to the ministry to deliver a petition. Pham Misson's strategy is to persuade the state to reduce taxes on platform work in order to stimulate the digital economy. And in turn, he hopes the app could then lower its own commission per ride. It's kind of a daydreamer. It never happened at the moment. But this, nevertheless, it illustrates the driver ability to play with the opportunity presented by the three-body problem, as well as a tendency to protest against government clampdowns on platform operations, rather than against the precarious labor conditions imposed by the platform itself. So this selected fieldwork material show well how the Vietnamese three-body problem generates unforeseen political negotiation in the platform age. The platform actually promptly expressed its dissatisfaction to the state regarding the new mode of calculation of VAT taxation, criticizing the lack of clarity from the tax authorities. However, despite pressure from both the platform and the street, the Vietnamese state did not revert to its previous taxation system, and Grab had to manage the impact directly with its partners. This example demonstrates how the regulatory power of the Vietnamese state was maintained, despite the economic power of Grab. Then the third act occurs when the Vietnamese state reinvents platformization as a governmental fix. Past the early uncertainty, the Vietnamese state started to view platformization as a significant asset for the modernization of the transport sector. Ho Chi Minh City is notoriously known for its traffic congestion. And an extensive interview with the deputy director of the Public Transport Management Center of Ho Chi Minh City was for me the occasion to discuss directly the state representative relationship with the Grab platform. The Ministry of Transport, as he confirms to me, was immediately in favor of the development of Grab in the country. However, he also added that, I quote, "We must acknowledge that we have very limited leeway regarding Grab's decision. Conversely, Grab is a foreign company, and its president in Vietnam clearly lacks the necessary political connection to officially cooperate with the Vietnamese authorities." At the Ho Chi Minh City province level, the Department of Transport officially recently signed a cooperation agreement with Grab to collaborate on establishing a public and free multimodal urban transport application, Go Bus Ho Chi Minh City. This application offers users various transport options. It's quite of the equivalent of City Mapper, for instance, except that it's a public app, including the estimated journey duration in real time and its costs based on the selected modes of transport. The development of this application, as explained to me by the Deputy Director of the Public Transport Management Transport, was only possible through collaboration with Grab, which provided its own database on real-time traffic in the city in exchange for the inclusion of travel options with Grab, by taxi or motorbike taxi within the application. As you see, Grab is often very efficient. For this example, you have 18 minutes and you have to take two buses to join your point A to point B. But if you take Grab car, it's only 6 minutes. And if you take a motorbike Grab, it's only 5 minutes. And usually when you try different journeys, Grab is always the best options in terms of timing. So yeah, it's a public app, but the other mode of official cooperation relates to the very recent opening of the very first metro line in Ho Chi Minh City and the challenging issue of the last mile. To encourage urban residents to use the metro instead of their personal moto and vehicles, it's important to offer good options for getting to their final stop when they arrive at the station. So consequently, there is now a combined Metro Grab taxi tickets that have been rolled out as part of a new pilot project. In some, Grab corresponds to a private operator now responsible for urban service activities, ensuring compliance with tax payments owed to the state and to modernization of the service through digitalization. In July 2022, the Deputy Prime Minister, Lê Minh Khai, formally met with Anthony Tan, the co-founder of Grab, to explore additional areas of collaboration beyond urban governance. So for instance, Grab has committed to enhancing the digitalization of Vietnamese farmers in order to assist them in selling their products through digital platforms. There is now a pilot project for each province to put in the front some very selected products and to advertise them online. In March 2025, Grab Vietnam also signed a 5-year cooperation agreement with the Vietnamese Tourism Development Fund. These examples illustrate the transformation of the Vietnamese state's statecraft, which is becoming more open to partnerships, as well as the gradual emergence of Grab, similar of to WeChat in China as a super app, where the urban transportation sector only served as a starting point. The relationship between Grab, Vietnam, and the Vietnamese state is thus now characterized by a highly unequal, of course, partnership and regulatory nature. The third act exemplifies the Vietnamese state's capacity to evolve from a pragmatic and tentative co-optation of the platform to an official integration within broader developmental agendas, thereby demonstrating its new ability to govern with the platform and not only trying to govern the platform. So a few concluding remarks and take-home message from Vietnam. So first, the Grab story in Vietnam reminds us that platforms should be understood as infrastructural power and as many battlefields. The three acts I presented all implied tough negotiations among the three-body structure I unpacked. Others stress the importance of being attentive to temporalities with regard to the way the state negotiates this process, learns from it, and possibly shifts its position within it. I thus refer to this process as platformization as negotiation, as a non-linear process, always in the remaking. The Vietnamese story also shows how platformization generates new interdependencies in a regulatory gray territory, which I call the three-body problem. Regarding informal work and workers and platformization, the dominant discourses around platformization in the global north tends to focus on the disempowering effects of platformization. But in Vietnam, local encounters between platforms, workers, and state authorities entail a dynamic process of constant negotiations, adaptations, and act of resistance. As a result, platform workers organize beyond the level of micro-contestations and individual resistance. So as a take-home message, this research carried out in Vietnam shows how unforeseen political empowerment of workers are possible through platformizations. It's, of course, called for complexifying the debates over what RIT call the platformalization fallacy in a very recent publication. Of course, we can call it a platformization fallacy in terms of economic situation for these workers, but it calls to go beyond sole economic stakes. The Vietnamese case is a call to consider political lines. An unforeseen political empowerment of platform workers has been possible, even in an authoritarian regime. Platforms are now a new intermediate between the Vietnamese state and the precarious workers. So it calls as well to reconsider mundane tactical interventions in the platform-mediated public spaces. Finally, regarding statecraft and the state issues, this work reminds us that digital authoritarian statecraft is relational, thus negotiable through a new nexus. State, even when authoritarian, are always a multiscalar constellations. And when the data collection mandate is outsourced to private company, it fuels the transformation of the political rationality, and it is also to be considered as a learning opportunity for the state. So there is no full disruption with platformization in Vietnam. The digitalization of urban governance remains actually deeply embedded and intertwined with the pre-existing government structures, something that could be seen actually during the COVID period regarding other tools. In Vietnam, no need of apps to follow up people during the confinement. Because you have this old communist style. In each neighborhood, you have a grandfather or grandmother who knows everything and everyone and can control everything. So digitalization does not, evaporate this former work of, controlling population. They are intertwined all together. So platformization also in Vietnam is really incremental, trial and error process. So I don't think the Vietnamese state has a very clear development agenda regarding digitalization. And following these negotiations offer a very interesting window into internal state affairs negotiation, revealing the everyday mechanics of the authoritarian assemblage, to quote Topak, working on Turkish. So actually platformization in the first place represents a crisis moment for the government, but it became a governmental fix, a way to fix issues in a public affairs. So platformization is a negotiation and a way now to fix public affairs and public issue. I think this is it. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I welcome any question and hope to engage with lively discussions. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just going to use the fact that I'm part of the center and ask you the first question. But thank you so much for a really interesting presentation. It was really fascinating to sort of look at the sort of evolution of the platformization and how the city body problem has worked. But what I was quite struck by when you were talking is that it seems that now in this latter stage, the Vietnamese state has managed to co-opt Grab into that kind of partnership, although like you said, it's not sort of balanced or equally powerful in terms of their respective position. But I was wondering, how does this potential co-optation of the Grab as a platform affect maybe the ability of the workers to resist? Is it still possible, given that the party and the company are now maybe pulling at one end?
Thank you very much for the question. It's actually, I think it's not merely the partnership that affect the ability of the workers to organize. It's more the way the algorithm has evolved. And the fact, like here, I just talk about one service, which is the first one, the historical one, which is taxi, taxi drivers. But then Grab now evolved in different services. So you have Grab food to deliver food and other options. So 10 years ago, when Grab arrived in the country, it attracted all sorts of drivers, people from very different backgrounds, even students, for instance, because the idea was like, it's the same all over the world. The idea is you can use your time, maybe you can connect only 2 hours in the morning and you make additional money. But after a while, the algorithm only, provide work for drivers who are like connected all day long. So the students left, people who had a proper job left. So the evolution of the socio-economic background only left, more precarious workers. A lot of them are actually migrant workers coming, for instance, from the Mekong Delta or other provinces. And this is their first way to have a job in the city, because you don't even know to know the city or the map of the city. It's on Thailand, you have Sopranzedi Works with a very beautiful title, which is the owner of the map, but you don't even need to know the map. So now Grab drivers are more precarious worker. Even those who have more, resources would go for Grab food or other services. So this is merely this evolution that prevents more organization. And I must say, even the historical Grab team drivers felt a bit, tired as well. And Pham Misson, very interestingly, last time we talked, was actually trying to get back to union. He knows that there is no, free unioning in Vietnam. It depends of the state under the fatherland, institution. But he said, okay, now my perspective is to try to get a specific recognition of platform drivers as specific drivers under unionizing. Because I think, only self-organizing among platform workers is not going to lead anywhere. And it's getting worse because now Grab is really monopolistic as well. Of course, Grab was more willing to negotiate when it was risking to leave. I mean, to see some of the drivers leaving for joining other platform. And the control is very strict over the phone. If you have another platform on your phone, you can be like, pushed away from Grab. When you sign a contract with Grab, even though you're not an employee at all, you need to commit only to this platform. So of course, the profile of people working for Grab are now quite different from the one in the first place. And they are more precarious. And as soon as they can, they would leave. Yes, there are so many questions. So yeah, please.
Okay, I have 2 questions. I just wondered whether there are attempts by groups critical to the government to use this platform to undermine the authority of the government power. That's number 1. And number 2, because the way you put it, the way you explain it, seems like the government is quite pragmatic in dealing with the actors engaged in this platformization, right? So what explains this pragmatic stance of the government towards those engaged in this platformization? Because I don't see there is any attempt at undermining the actors. The government seems to be quite pragmatic in dealing with them.
I think the Vietnamese government has always been pragmatic since the reunification and even before. It's a bit comparable to the Chinese perspective of socialist market. This idea that you want the economy to thrive, but you don't want to put at risk the party. So you need to be pragmatic to ensure economic development, which is a paternalist, way of justifying you're an authoritarian state. So I am authoritarian, but I provide development. This is, to put it very quickly, the stance of the Vietnamese government since the beginning. So it's pragmatic because you need to find new ways to develop and to address problems. So the Vietnamese state doesn't, can't escape on the fact there are problems, especially on public transport and everything. So digitalizations is seen as a progressive way of addressing this. So they don't see the platform as destabilizing. It could be destabilizing, but it could be a partner. So they usually use this pilot thing, pilot projects. Here it's with platformization, but it was the same with a special economic zone in the beginning of the Doi the reforms. So here it's just the new thing is not the reforms, it's the platformization coming from abroad. So we don't say no, we don't say open door. We are just like, take our time to wait and see and to adjust our response. So I think, again, temporality is interesting because digitalization often is seen as something completely new, but actually it's not that new. It's just a new process, but it reactivates older way of doing. So it illustrates how the Vietnamese state is still very pragmatic to ensure the state stability and the economic development. And the Grab team actually were not addressing the state in the first place. Actually, I didn't come back to the very beginning of the story. It's quite interesting. The very first teams were actually drivers. We were, setting Zalo group to be in touch because it's a dangerous work. You can have bad clients or you can have accidents, especially at night. So they organized together. And in the first place, it was a way as well to organize against the stay-home drivers, because the old informal drivers were very hungry when they saw that they were losing all their clients to Grab drivers, and some of them sometimes order fake rides in remote neighborhoods, and they would violently aggress the Grab drivers. So Grab drivers in the first place set up groups to it's self-help groups to coordinate for very logistical issues in the first place, but they gained people month after month, so they became more than that. They became a negotiation platform merely directed to the platform. That's why Grab discovered them one day and said, okay, we can't really forbid them. But interestingly, it's only in Ho Chi Minh City. I am actually, at the moment, we are doing a comparative perspective with Sarah Turner, who's done an equivalent of my work, but in Hanoi. And in Hanoi, there were no Grab teams. But in 2016, when Grab, formalized teams in Ho Chi Minh City, they proposed team in Hanoi. But they are not so popular in Hanoi because drivers saw them as something coming from the platform. So they're like, we don't want to be dependent on the platform even more. But in Ho Chi Minh City, it's different. But these platforms are not really used for political, negotiation with the state outside the question of platformization. They are very cautious. It's really like to negotiate in the small interests. So they don't use it. That's why for during the strike, they will use petitions, that kind of stuff to talk to the state. But yes.
Hi. So what do you think about the tension between Grab as an essential tool or a centralized tool and platform in everyday life for Vietnamese people and the regulation from the state? They have such power right now to just not be dismissed from the market entirely. At first, of course, it was a pilot project, but now everyone is relying on it for the income. So why don't or why doesn't Grab resist the demand from the state? Or like resist, like, you know, the regulation that they are demanding Grab to do from the state?
I mean, the regulation is not that strong, actually. That's what I say. It's a very unequal partnership. Actually, Grab is gaining new market opportunity thanks to the state. For example, to go to a new, theme like tourism, or to invest in 5G. I mean, there are like our insurance and fintech. Really, like motorbike and taxi was really an entry door. And now, thanks to the partnership with the state, Grab is able, to gain market share in very different sectors of activities. So they are quite happy with the state, demand. It was just in 2020 because the calculation of the VAT was a bit, because Grab as a to calculate the tax he owed to the government was only counting the percentage it takes on each ride, and all the, it's a bit complicated calcul, but it was in 2020, and now there is no more attention about that. Taxation remains quite low, actually. But for the Vietnamese state, from what I heard from people mostly based in Ho Chi Minh City, like city province level, they would say it's better than nothing, because before, with the informal sector, all these workers wouldn't give any tax at all. So even if Grab provide low taxes, it's still better than nothing, and it helps to alleviate the question of informality, because Grab drivers are not counted as informal workers. They are not informal. They work for a platform, even though they're not employee, and the platform pays taxes on their work. So for the Vietnamese states, it's a way to deal with several problems at the same time: the problem of traffic transport and the problem of informality. So they would say, we relieved informality. Informal work has decreased a lot recently. And of course, people are still very precarious, but they pay tax. So even though it's lower tax, I don't think at the moment, I haven't heard the Vietnamese state wanted to, increase this tax. So I think the Vietnamese state is quite happy with the partnership at the moment. It sees it as a win-win thing. And I think Grab sees it the same way, at least at the moment. It could change, of course, but I don't know if it answers the question, but yeah. Yes, there were questions. Yeah.
I'm a PhD student in geography department, and I was from Vietnam, and I did Vietnam as well. So I have a lot of questions, but I think I'm going to limit it to the first one, quite related to the last question, is there's this, in the past few years, the Vin group has been quite popular in the field, and then they enter Platformization quite recently, right?
Yep.
This past 1 or 2 years. So they have increasing competition, and they have, because they are like a Vietnamese conglomerate, they're not foreign capitals and foreign company per se. So I think they add a very different dynamic to this like three-body problem that you have. So I wonder what is your take on that, and how do you think it's going to change the scene? The second is more theoretical question, I guess, because I'm quite wondering why you choose governments with fixed as a concept, because it's like, you're citing the fact that you have turbulence, is also from like this Marxist and David Harvey kind of or like concepts. So governments of like the fixed is a very kind of like economic and it's finance, capitalism in a way that money is finds in a new way. So I'm wondering like why you choose this terminology and how it relates to like prices coming from like the state capitalism, right?
Thank you very much for these great questions. It's really like yes, fix. I didn't go into details on that, but of course it's come from the dual couple glitches and fixes, which is two antagonist way of seeing platformization. From my very anthropological perspective, I usually position myself in the glitches, the way people use interstices, to maneuver and everything. But I think the way the government sees platformization, it's more a fixed thinking. And of course, fixed thinking has been developed merely for economic, stakes, but in a very, I'm actually formalizing a paper on that at the moment, so it's still an ongoing reflection. But I think this fixed thinking would gain not to be considered solely as an economic perspective, but to bring political thinking into it. And I think so the government wants to fix economic stuff, but it's more political issues at stakes here, especially in terms of the capacity to govern and the way to envision statecraft in Vietnam and to address again limitation or such as informality, disordered public transport. So this fixed thinking is more to adopt the perspective of the state. They want to fix this through partnership with platforms. So this is where it comes from. But I really want to keep the balance between the two. Here when I study citizenship of the drivers, I'm more on a glitches thinking. But I think it's a dual perspective. So it's important as well to address the state perspective and to see how it's a trial and error protest. Because many works on Vietnam or China would see the state as a black box, very centralized, very authoritarian. So I think this work is a good opportunity to see how it works on an everyday basis and how it addresses unforeseen, new actors that could be challenging, such as platforms, and to see the shift in perception and to see that now, okay, we are establishing a new way of governing. So that's why I choose this fixed thing. And thank you as well for mentioning San it's quite an interesting story, VinFast, which is from the Vin Group company, which is a huge company as well. I saw arriving during my PhD years and who invest in tourism, in housing, in hospital, and everything. It's like the Samsung of Vietnam, to use a Korean comparison. And quite interestingly, VinFast was hoping to sell electric vehicles to the US. And it actually stopped suddenly because Tesla mostly, was a highly competitive actor in the market. So VinFast get, so many electric vehicles that were like here and they didn't know what to do with it. So now they are trying to sell it to new partners such as India or Indonesia. But they also try to position themselves in the platformization, landscape. So it's true that they develop their own app using two arguments. We are national and we are green. So actually, when I talk about the three-body problem, sometimes I think it could be a four-body problem because you have the clients as well in the circles. So if Sun would be a strong competitor to Grab, really depends on how the people will react. Are they actually interested by the argument of being green and of being national? I'm not so sure. It mostly depends on the price and on the time you have to wait. So I don't know. And actually, a few years ago, I would never have imagined that Gojek would be kicked out so quickly. So it's true as well that this economy is changing very, very fast. But I'm not sure that VinFast being national and electric doesn't. I mean, that it really changes the issues and the problem here, because Grab remain a very prominent actor and he set up the first regulation as well. So I guess new platform coming now, the state has already regulated, the sector. So and Grab was the one to negotiate in the first place. So I'm not sure VinFast as a national platform could change, the taxation for instance. But of course, it calls for pursuing this ethnographic study because from one fieldwork to another, there are changes. So of course, it's a never-ending story, and platformization is not come to, mature age. It's still changing very fast. And interestingly, now Grab is investing a lot in fintech because they have all these drivers. So as a drivers, they would propose some rent, so you can borrow money to buy a new motorbike. So they have like a bunch of clients and they don't ask a lot of, of papers compared to national banks. So they as a very, as a first actor in the landscape, they still remain the most powerful at the moment. So I don't know for fun, but that could be something to follow up on. Yes.
I've got
Yeah.
any questions on
Okay. And
here, I'll
who
give
here?
Dave and then I'll catch you after.
Okay.
might not have enough time to answer all, so please feel free to pick
Okay, okay.
which
I
kind
will
makes
see if there
most
is
sense.
something different from. Yep, so we've got 3. So there is one question of as negotiated authoritarianism. In the case, is that your point that the regulatory power is quite reactive but adaptive? I think that it's both, actually. It just shows that authoritarianism can be negotiated. You can deliver a petition, you can strike, you can negotiate, even though it's unequal, even though it's opaque. That's my point. That they and it's interesting that it's a Thai government with less authoritarian, at least historically, who prevent, Grab to come to the country. And it's a long story, so I don't have time to go into details, but it comes from the relationship between the state and the informal workers. The Thai government put a lot of effort into recognizing at some point some of the informal workers. So seeing platforms arriving and putting all these efforts down was something they didn't want to take the risk of. So, but in the case of Vietnam, again, I saw some negotiation. So I hope it will answer the question, but not full disruption of urban governance and the governance state. I'm not sure I see a trajectory of optimism with digitalization. Of course, there are always constraints to answer the second questions. Actually, it's interesting. The Grab drivers in interviews, they really talks about economic issues, very concrete issues, but very few talked about surveillance. They don't feel surveilled. I mean, you live in Vietnam, you're surveilled anyways. Bill Iden wrote a book, Vietnam, the Rising Dragon, and one of the chapter title is Grandfather is Watching You again. So you have in the city division, you used to have, because the map just changed, but you had the district, the sub-district, the sub-sub-district, the neighborhoods, and then you have the nest, tall and full. It's only like 30 families, and you have one representative of the state at this, so you are surveilled in many ways in Vietnam. So interestingly, the arrival of the platform and the logarithmic, surveillance was not mentioned by the drivers. I don't say it's not an important issue, but it's not something that is problematic to them compared to other economic issues. So that's an interesting, of course, element. Governing with the platform. Yeah, governing with the platform, I'm afraid, to answer the third question, does not aim at improving conditions for Grab workers. I think unfortunately, the state authority are not focusing on that. What they focus on is to have a better, less traffic congestions and the image of modernity. So in that point, Grab helps, but the Grab workers' conditions come at the second point, definitely. So it's only improved urban governance capacity. Yes, the socialist state is not that socialist in that way, but yes.
Sorry, I didn't quite get when you mentioned about one of the guys, one of the workers from Grab, he went to the parliament or
yes.
The governmental body to ask for tax reduction. Do you know the result of that?
Yeah, the result is it didn't get any answer. But I think the result is one point, but the mere act of doing it came from Ho Chi Minh City. I should mention it traveled all the way up to Hanoi by motorbike. And on the way, it was meeting all the drivers, the Grab drivers in every provinces. Because one problem as well to coordinate resistance of drivers would be to think at the national level. And at the moment, it's a very localized, form of resistance. So he was hoping to promote the idea of a shared condition nationally. So all over the trip, he was collecting signatures for a petition, saying, okay, we are essential to the economy, especially during COVID, the drivers during lockdown. They were the one, at least in the first months, doing delivery of food and everything. So they had their moments. So he was hoping the government could, okay, maybe you can relieve the taxes of the platform, so the platform can maybe alleviate the percentage on each ride. It's of course idealistic, it doesn't work this way, because in the three-body problem, it's not equal power, and obviously the workers don't have that much power, but still they have some, because the platforms don't want to lose them. If all the drivers disappear, there is no platform anymore. But so they were trying to use the interstice, so to negotiate with the platform, they would go through the state. That was their point. But it's only one way of doing. Some other drivers were confronting the platforms by striking and by disconnecting for a day. And there were very interesting and impassionate debates online about that, because all the drivers have different views on their conditions. So, which I think very interesting, because I used to work with informal vendors, informal drivers before, and it was so atomized. They didn't have any capacity to collectively organize. And in the global north, when you read about platformization, the first thing you read is it's atomization of workers, which is true, of course. But in Vietnam, I was seeing the reverse. I was seeing the contrary. So that's why I wanted to do this study. So I'm not saying, of course, that the workers' conditions is improving or is good, but actually it gave informal or precarious workers a new way to get heard or to express themselves collectively to the state, which is very new in Vietnam. But unfortunately, of course, it didn't lead to any concrete results. And even the way people saw them usually is very negative.
But then the government didn't legally charge him.
I mean, the government didn't provide any positive answer, but it didn't do anything neither when there were strikes and everything. So the government wants to keep this going, I guess. So it's negotiating with these two bodies. But it didn't answer. But it was authorized to enter the Ministry of Finance, which is already something. That's what I'm saying in terms of image and everything. But
We've run out of time, but
Sorry.
many thanks to Marie for this fantastic talk. And
thank you very much.